Unless there's something that you guys want to add before we make this a dialogue, I suspect that the best things will occur if we just really switch to questions and try to do our best to account for ourselves in reaction to them now. I saw one right up here.
Yeah, a quick one. You stated that the first part you saw was in the form of some sort of correspondence. Were you looking at carbons, or did you get, how did you get it?
Well, we actually have 1,600 letters that my dad wrote. I would say almost all of them are called first-person carbons or second-person carbons originals, but there are some that we only have copies and that were copied when they did there's 6 volumes of letters. And I believe what happened is people were sending their letters in to try and fulfill that. But those letters are all, we have all those letters but one in carbon. So there was only one that I found that I had to get off the internet.
The second part of that is, did you deal with responses to these letters?
No, and there's only one person who probably was really up to responding to my father, and that was, well, no, I just want to be honest, he wrote predominantly to 3 people. He wrote to, and you covered this in LA, but he wrote to a young woman who was doing her PhD dissertation, Claudia Bush-Krenz, and I thought, oh my God, if I was 20 or 22 and had this, or 24 and had these letters coming at me, they never met, but this was the initial person that was the beneficiary of these incredible, what would you call them?
Outpouring.
Outpourings, thank you.
And I mean, Pamela you guys should correct me, but letters that ran into the 10s and 20
and
page
she was,
lengths.
and God bless her. God bless her. They had an interaction. You know, she emailed him back, but she was I would say she was a recipient of this. What did you call it? Outpouring. Then there was a second person, Dr. Patricia Warwick, who was Dr. Pat Warwick, who he thought was a man at first. And she was actually probably as close to his intellectual equal as I have seen. I've read both sides of the correspondence, and she's written a book. She wrote a book, and they were very deep correspondence, 2 books. And then the third person he wrote to was Paul Williams, and I would say Paul Williams, who was his literary executor, he took it to a different notch. Pamela's was not Pamela's. Patricia Warwick's was the most philosophical, the most dense letters, and she would actually respond and trigger a different idea, and that's unique in her correspondence. And then he wrote to Paul Williams kind of about what was happening and his thoughts on it, and then he wrote to his agent more in a storyline and sort of what had happened to him. But I would say those are the 4 people he really, and Malcolm Edwards he wrote to, and Malcolm Edwards thought he was insane.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Can anything be said to the extent of this mode of writing that you're describing? Can anything be said of how that connects to his other modes of writing, the short stories, the longer fiction? Just curious, was he writing this kind of thing sort of all his life in notebooks, and then, or is this something that he started after '74, and then this was a new mode for him?
I guess I can try to take that. The writing that is accounted for in this volume, and that he called the Exegesis, begins very specifically after the visionary events in February and March of '74. That said, he was a graphomaniac in several phases of his writing life. I mean, in 1964, I believe he wrote 6 or 7 novels, a couple of them masterpieces. Well, that's, from the perspective of a novelist, an outlandish thing to consider. He was always a voluminous correspondent, and I think it's also worth bringing into this that he was a magnificent and celebrated talker. People would come into his sphere and be regaled with all-night, bull sessions, basically, on the nature of the universe. So there were all kinds of precursors for the explosiveness of the writing of the Exegesis. But he did not commit any sustained, philosophical or theological writing until these visions came over him. It was all of those impulses were translated within the fiction or within his, kind of his talk to that point.
Did his fiction output decrease then when he started writing this kind of material, or are they related, or perhaps he was already slowing down?
I think it's true that there are fewer novels in the last part of his life, while the exegesis is going on in the background. But that is it's very hard to make a controlled measure of the circumstances because his life was so very different in different parts, different moments of his life. And he did commit in the last part of his life, and it's a pleasure to be able to say this, to a much more kind of considered and revised prose style in his fiction. And so you also have him slowing down as an artist for artistic purposes in that time frame.
I have a copy of one of his tapes. Do you have tapes?
Oh, we
How
do.
many thousands?
Oh no! Oh, you mean written tapes where maybe he was? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Why don't we?
Cassettes?
Yeah, there are cassettes of his speech, but why don't we talk
Yes.
about this afterwards? Thank you. Come up and tell us about it. Hi.
Question for Pamela Jackson. What got cut? How would you characterize it? What's the best stuff that got cut?
Oh, well, it's more like what got selected, because actually probably 9 out of 10 pages got cut. So it was the process was about going through and finding what was the best writing, the most interesting thinking, the most excerptable thinking, and then trying to represent the most important sort of ideas, what was most important to him and what seemed most interesting and insightful to us. So we were pulling out of a mass, which hopefully eventually people will also be able to, other people will get to dig around in, because it was just such a joy when it wasn't a terrible ordeal to to look through these and find these, wonderful, wonderful pieces.